I'm Elena, 28, and I've been married to David for 3 years now. My younger sister Sophie has always been the golden child of our family, so when she announced her engagement to Marcus, a charming businessman she'd met just 8 months prior, our entire family was over the moon. Everything seemed perfect for the engagement party, the bridal shower, and the rehearsal dinner. Then the wedding day arrived, and what my husband discovered changed everything. Before I dive into this incredible story, let me paint you the picture of how we got here. Sophie had always been lucky in love. At 25, she was beautiful, successful in her marketing career, and had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. When she started dating Marcus Richardson, a supposed real estate mogul from Denver, our parents were thrilled. He was handsome, well-dressed, drove a luxury car, and seemed completely devoted to Sophie. Marcus claimed to own several commercial properties across Colorado and was expanding into the Chicago market where our family lived. Our father, Robert, who owned a successful chain of auto dealerships, was immediately impressed by Marcus's business acumen and stories of real estate success. Our mother, Linda, adored how attentive Marcus was to Sophie, always bringing her flowers and remembering every detail about their conversations. David, my husband who works as a forensic accountant, was polite but reserved around Marcus from the beginning. When I asked him about it, he'd just say something felt off but couldn't pinpoint what exactly. I dismissed his concerns as professional skepticism he'd developed from investigating financial crimes all day. The wedding was planned for the luxurious Lakewood Country Club outside Chicago. Marcus insisted on paying for most of the celebration, claiming his business was doing exceptionally well, and he wanted to give Sophie the wedding of her dreams. The guest list included about 150 people, mostly our family and friends, plus Marcus's supposed business associates, and a few relatives he'd flown in from Denver. From the moment we arrived at the country club for the weekend festivities, I noticed Marcus was constantly on his phone, taking calls and stepping away from conversations. When I mentioned this to Sophie, she explained that he was closing a major deal and had to stay connected to his business partners. She seemed so happy and in love that I didn't want to dampen her mood with unnecessary concerns. The rehearsal dinner was held on Friday night in the club's elegant dining room. Marcus gave a touching speech about finding his soulmate in Sophie and how grateful he was to be joining our family. He spoke eloquently about his business philosophy and how he looked forward to collaborating with our father on future ventures. Dad was practically beaming with pride at having such a successful son-in-law. During the dinner, I observed Marcus carefully. He was charming and articulate, telling engaging stories about his business deals and travels. However, I noticed something peculiar about his supposed business associates. They seemed uncomfortable when asked specific questions about their work, giving vague answers and quickly changing subjects. One man, introduced as Marcus's business partner James, couldn't remember the name of their company's main office building when another guest asked about it. That night, as David and I prepared for bed in our hotel room, he seemed unusually quiet and thoughtful. When I pressed him about it, he admitted that something about Marcus's financial stories didn't add up. The numbers he'd mentioned regarding his real estate portfolio and the timeline of his business growth seemed inconsistent with market realities. I could be wrong, David said carefully, but some of the properties he's described don't exist in the Denver market. I've worked with real estate investors before, and certain details he's mentioned just don't align with how commercial real estate actually works. I was torn between loyalty to Sophie and David's professional expertise. Sophie had never been happier, and I didn't want to ruin her wedding weekend based on vague suspicions. We agreed to keep watching and see if anything else seemed suspicious. Saturday morning brought the wedding day, and the country club was transformed into a fairy tale setting. White roses and crystal chandeliers decorated the ceremony space, and Sophie looked absolutely radiant in her designer gown. As I helped her get ready in the bridal suite, she kept gushing about how perfect everything was and how lucky she felt to have found Marcus. He's already talking about us buying a house together, Sophie confided as her makeup artist worked on her face. He's found this amazing property in Denver that would be perfect for us. It's a bit expensive, but he says it's an investment that will pay for itself. Something about this statement made me uneasy, but I couldn't quite articulate why. I asked Sophie if she'd seen the property herself, and she admitted she hadn't, but trusted Marcus's judgment completely. He'd shown her photos and financial projections, and she was convinced it was a smart move. The ceremony itself was beautiful and emotional. Marcus seemed genuinely moved as he recited his vows, and Sophie was glowing with happiness. Our parents were crying tears of joy, and even David seemed to be enjoying himself. For a moment, I wondered if we'd been overthinking everything, and Marcus really was the perfect match for my sister. The reception began with cocktails on the club's terrace overlooking the lake. Marcus was in his element, networking with our father's business associates and charming everyone he met. I watched him work the room with practiced ease, remembering details about people's lives and asking thoughtful follow-up questions about their businesses and families. During cocktail hour, I noticed Marcus having an intense conversation with our father near the bar. They were discussing investment opportunities, and Dad looked increasingly interested as Marcus outlined his expansion plans for the Chicago market. I moved closer to try to overhear their conversation. With your established business network and my real estate expertise, we could create something remarkable, Marcus was saying. I'm looking for a local partner who understands the market dynamics here. Our father was nodding enthusiastically. I've been considering diversifying beyond the automotive sector. Real estate has always interested me, but I've never had the right partner. I have a proposition that could be perfect for both of us, Marcus continued. There's a commercial development opportunity that just became available. The initial investment is substantial, but the returns could be extraordinary. I'd be happy to show you the projections after the honeymoon. As I listened to this conversation, alarm bells started ringing in my head. Marcus was clearly positioning himself to involve our father in some kind of business deal. Given David's suspicions about Marcus's background, this felt like a dangerous development. When dinner was served, I found myself seated at the family table with David, my parents, and Marcus's supposed relatives from Denver. His aunt and uncle, Margaret and William, seemed pleasant enough, but there was something rehearsed about their stories. When I asked Margaret about Sophie's childhood visits to Denver, she looked confused before quickly recovering and giving a vague response about how busy they'd all been over the years. David was unusually quiet during dinner, frequently checking his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he said he was following up on some work leads, but assured me he was paying attention to the celebration. However, I could see the wheels turning in his head, and his expression grew more concerned as the evening progressed. After dinner, as the dancing began, Marcus and Sophie had their first dance to At Last by Etta James. They looked perfect together, and Sophie seemed to be living her dream. Our parents joined them for the traditional family dance, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should be. But then David's phone buzzed with what seemed to be an urgent message. He stepped away to take a call, and when he returned about 10 minutes later, his face was pale and his jaw was set in a way that indicated serious concern. He approached me on the dance floor and whispered urgently in my ear. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice tight with controlled anxiety. I stopped dancing and looked at him in confusion. "What are you talking about? We can't leave in the middle of Sophie's wedding." "Trust me on this, Elena. We need to go, and we need to talk to your parents immediately. It's about Marcus." The seriousness in his voice made my stomach drop. "What about Marcus?" David glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "He's not who he says he is. Not even close. Your sister married a con artist, and he's been targeting your father for months." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. "That's impossible. You're being paranoid." "I wish I were," David replied grimly. "I'll explain everything, but we need privacy. Make an excuse to leave and get your parents to come with us. Don't let on that anything is wrong." My mind was racing as I tried to process what David was telling me. I looked across the dance floor at Sophie, who was laughing with her new husband, completely unaware that her world was about to crumble. The thought of destroying her happiness on what should be the best day of her life was unbearable. "Are you absolutely certain?" I whispered desperately, hoping David would tell me he'd made a mistake. "Completely," he replied. "I have documentation that proves Marcus Richardson doesn't exist." The man your sister married has been running this same scam across multiple states. I felt sick to my stomach as the implications hit me. If David was right, everything about Marcus was a lie. His business, his background, his feelings for Sophie, all of it fabricated to gain access to our family's money. With trembling hands, I approached my parents on the dance floor. They were swaying together to a slow song, looking happier than I'd seen them in years. The thought of what I was about to tell them made me want to vomit. "Mom, Dad," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "David needs to speak with us privately. It's urgent." My father looked concerned. "Is everything all right? Is it work-related?" "Something like that," I replied, hating that I was being deliberately vague. "Can we step outside for a few minutes?" We made our way to a quiet corner of the country club's lobby, away from the celebration. David had his laptop bag with him, which I now realized had been his plan all along. He'd been preparing for this confrontation. "What's going on, David?" my mother asked, looking worried. David took a deep breath before responding. "I need to show you something about Marcus. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but I have proof of everything." He opened his laptop and pulled up a folder of documents and images. Marcus Richardson doesn't exist. The man who married Sophie today is actually named Vincent Castellano, and he's wanted for questioning in connection with multiple fraud cases across the country. My parents stared at the screen in shock as David showed them driver's licenses with different names but the same face, news articles about investment scams, and police reports describing a pattern of marriage-based fraud. "This is impossible," my father said, his voice shaking. "I've done business with successful people my entire career. I would know if someone was trying to con me." "He's extremely good at what he does," David explained patiently. "Look at this pattern. He targets successful businessmen through their daughters or other family members. He courts them for months, gains their trust, then proposes investment opportunities that turn out to be elaborate schemes to steal their money." My mother was staring at a photo of Marcus, Vincent, standing next to a different woman in what appeared to be another wedding photo. "Who is this woman?" "Her name was Sarah Chin," David replied grimly. "She was the daughter of a successful tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. Vincent married her 18 months ago using the identity Robert Martinez. 3 weeks after the wedding, he disappeared with over $800,000 from her father's accounts." The room was spinning as I tried to process this information. "How did you find all this?" "I started having doubts yesterday during the rehearsal dinner," David explained. "Some of the financial details Marcus mentioned didn't make sense to someone with my background. I reached out to a colleague who specializes in financial fraud investigations and asked him to run a background check." My father was scrolling through more documents, his face growing paler with each revelation. "These other victims, what happened to them?" "Financial ruin in most cases," David said quietly. "The pattern is always the same. He spends months building trust, learning about their business operations and financial habits. Then he proposes investment opportunities that require immediate large cash transfers. By the time they realize what's happened, he's disappeared with new identities and documentation." I looked at my parents, seeing the devastation in their eyes as they realized how close they'd come to losing everything. How close was he to succeeding with us? David pulled up another document. "Based on what I overheard tonight, he was planning to approach your father next week with an investment opportunity. Given how much trust he'd built up and how eager your father seemed to partner with him, it might have worked." My mother started crying quietly. "What about Sophie? How do we tell her that her marriage is a lie?" This was the question I'd been dreading. Sophie was still inside, celebrating what she believed was the beginning of her happily ever after. How could we destroy that illusion? "She needs to know," David said gently. "And we need to act quickly. People like Vincent don't stick around once their cover is blown. If he suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear tonight." My father straightened up, his business instincts taking over. "What do we need to do?" "First, we secure your financial accounts," David replied. "I'm guessing Vincent has been gathering information about your banking and investment details. We need to change passwords and notify your financial institutions immediately. Then we confront him?" "Not directly," David warned. "These people can be dangerous when cornered. We need to involve law enforcement and present them with all the evidence at once. As we sat in that quiet lobby, making plans to expose Vincent's deception, I kept thinking about Sophie inside the ballroom, dancing with a man who had built their entire relationship on lies. My heart was breaking for my sister, but I knew we had no choice but to protect our family. David was already on the phone with his FBI contact, explaining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. My parents were calling their financial advisor and bank security, implementing emergency protocols to protect their assets. Within an hour, we had federal agents on their way to the country club and my father's account secured. Now came the hardest part, telling Sophie that her new husband was a criminal who had been using her to gain access to our family's money. We decided to approach Sophie carefully, asking her to step outside for a family photo. She came willingly, still glowing with happiness from her perfect wedding day. Vincent was talking to some guests near the bar, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Sophie," I began gently, "we need to talk to you about something important." She looked at our serious faces, and her smile faded. "What's wrong? Is someone sick?" David opened his laptop again, and I watched my sister's face as she saw the evidence of Vincent's deception. The photos of him with other women, the documentation of his multiple identities, the news articles about his victims, it all laid out the truth about the man she'd just married. Sophie's reaction was exactly what I'd feared. First came denial, then anger, then devastating heartbreak as the reality sank in. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing as she realized that everything she'd believed about her relationship was a lie. "None of it was real," she whispered through her tears. "He never loved me at all." I held my sister as she cried, my own heart breaking for her pain. At the same time, I was grateful for David's instincts and persistence. If he hadn't investigated Vincent's background, our family could have lost everything. The FBI agents arrived discreetly, and we explained the situation. They were already familiar with Vincent's pattern of operations and were eager to finally apprehend him. The challenge was preventing him from escaping once he realized his cover was blown. The agents coordinated with local police to surround the country club while we went back inside to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Sophie, despite her devastation, agreed to help with the plan to ensure Vincent didn't suspect anything until the authorities were ready to move. Walking back into that ballroom, knowing what I now knew about Vincent, was surreal. He was still playing his role perfectly, the charming groom, the successful businessman, the devoted husband. But now I could see through his performance to the calculating predator underneath. Vincent approached us as we returned, his expression showing mild concern. "Is everything all right? You all look a bit serious." "Just some family business to discuss," my father replied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." For the next 30 minutes, we maintained the charade while federal agents positioned themselves around the venue. Sophie was incredible, somehow finding the strength to dance with Vincent and smile for photos while knowing the truth about who he really was. When the agents were ready to move, they did so swiftly and professionally. Vincent was arrested quietly, away from the main celebration, charged with multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. His supposed business associates and family members had already disappeared, apparently alerted by some predetermined signal when law enforcement arrived. The aftermath was devastating for Sophie. The marriage was annulled immediately, and she spent weeks in therapy processing the emotional trauma of discovering that her relationship had been an elaborate lie. The media attention was intense, as Vincent's arrest exposed a multi-state fraud operation that had victimized dozens of families. But in some ways, we were fortunate. Unlike Vincent's previous victims, we discovered his deception before he could steal from us. My father's assets were protected, and Sophie, though emotionally shattered, was free from a man who would have eventually destroyed her life. The investigation revealed that Vincent had been planning this con for over a year. He'd specifically targeted Sophie after researching our family's business success and determining that my father would be a profitable mark. Every detail of their relationship, their chance meeting at a coffee shop, their shared interests, even his apartment in Denver, had been carefully orchestrated to win her trust and gain access to our family. In the months that followed, we learned more about Vincent's operation. He worked with a team of accomplices who posed as business associates, family members, and references. They had fake social media profiles going back years, elaborate backstories, and even a network of properties they could use to support their cover identities. The most chilling discovery was that Vincent had detailed files on our entire family. He knew our habits, our financial situations, our personal relationships, and our psychological profiles. We had been studied like laboratory specimens, analyzed for weaknesses that could be exploited. Sophie eventually recovered from the emotional trauma, though it took time and significant support from our family and professional counselors. She moved back home temporarily, took a leave of absence from work, and focused on healing from the betrayal. A year later, Sophie was strong enough to testify at Vincent's trial. She faced her former husband in court and told the story of how he had manipulated her emotions and exploited her trust. Her testimony helped convict him on multiple fraud charges, and he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The experience changed our family in profound ways. We became more cautious about trusting strangers, more protective of our personal information, and more appreciative of the genuine relationships in our lives. David's instincts and professional expertise had saved us from financial ruin and possibly worse. Sophie eventually returned to work and began dating again, though she was much more careful about potential partners. She developed a healthy skepticism that served her well, and when she did find love again 2 years later, it was with a man whose background she thoroughly investigated and whose character was verified by people she trusted. Our father implemented new security measures for his business operations and personal finances. He hired a full-time security consultant and established protocols for verifying anyone who approached him with investment opportunities. The experience had taught him that successful people are often targets for sophisticated criminals who prey on trust and relationships. As for me, the experience strengthened my marriage to David. His willingness to trust his instincts, even when it meant potentially ruining Sophie's wedding day, demonstrated his integrity and commitment to protecting our family. I learned to value his professional skepticism as a gift rather than paranoia. The broader impact of Vincent's arrest rippled through law enforcement agencies across the country. His capture led to the identification and arrest of several accomplices and the dismantling of a fraud network that had operated for years. The FBI estimated that his organization had stolen over $12 million from victims across 8 states. Looking back on that wedding day, I'm amazed at how close we came to disaster. If David hadn't trusted his instincts and investigated Vincent's background, our family's financial security could have been destroyed. Sophie's emotional recovery would have been complicated by the additional trauma of knowing she had inadvertently helped a criminal steal from her own family. The experience taught us valuable lessons about the importance of verifying trust, the sophistication of modern fraud operations, and the need to protect ourselves and our loved ones from predators who exploit human emotions for financial gain. Sophie often says that while the experience was devastating, it ultimately made her stronger and more resilient. She learned to trust her own instincts, to value genuine relationships over superficial charm, and to appreciate the family members who stood by her during the darkest period of her life. Our story serves as a warning about the dangers of romance scams and marriage fraud. These criminals are often sophisticated, well-organized, and extremely patient. They invest months or even years building trust and relationships before striking. They prey on basic human needs for love, acceptance, and belonging. If you ever find yourself in a situation where something feels off about a romantic partner or potential family member, trust your instincts. Ask questions, verify information, and don't be afraid to investigate inconsistencies. Real love can withstand scrutiny, but fraudulent relationships crumble when exposed to honest examination. The red flags we missed or dismissed in Vincent's case included his reluctance to discuss his past in detail, inconsistencies in his stories about his business and background, his isolation of Sophie from certain family discussions, and his rush to involve our father in business opportunities. These warning signs seem obvious in retrospect, but they were subtle enough that even experienced, successful people like our parents were fooled. Today, our family is stronger and more united than ever. Sophie has found genuine love with a man whose character and background we thoroughly verified. My parents continue to run their successful business with enhanced security measures. David and I have grown closer through the experience of protecting our family from a sophisticated criminal operation. And Vincent Castellano remains in federal prison, where he belongs, unable to prey on innocent families seeking love and connection. The lesson from our story is clear. Trust your instincts, verify information, and remember that real relationships are built on truth, not deception. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when someone you trust raises concerns about a person in your life, listen carefully and investigate thoroughly. Love should enhance your life and strengthen your relationships with family and friends, not isolate you from them or put your financial security at risk. Anyone who tries to separate you from your support system or rushes you into major financial decisions should be viewed with extreme suspicion. Our family survived because we had each other, because David trusted his professional instincts, and because we acted quickly when we discovered the truth. Not every family is so fortunate. Protect yourself, protect your loved ones, and never let politeness or social pressure prevent you from asking the hard questions that could save your family from financial and emotional destruction. The investigation into Vincent's network continued for months after his arrest, revealing the true scope of his criminal enterprise. Federal agents discovered that his organization had been operating for nearly a decade, with Vincent as one of several operators who specialized in romance-based fraud. Each operator had a specific profile they targeted. Vincent focused on wealthy businessmen with unmarried daughters, while others in the network targeted widowed women, divorced executives, or lonely retirees. The sophistication of their operation was staggering. They maintained a database of potential targets across the country, complete with detailed psychological profiles, financial assessments, and relationship histories. They had safe houses in multiple states, document forgers who created impeccable false identities, and even legitimate businesses that served as fronts for their activities. What made Vincent particularly dangerous was his patience and attention to detail. Unlike other scammers who rushed to extract money quickly, he was willing to invest months or even years building relationships and trust. The FBI showed us surveillance footage from months before Sophie even met Vincent. He had been watching our family, learning our routines, and planning his approach with military precision. Sophie's recovery was gradual but steady. In addition to individual therapy, she joined a support group for victims of romance scams. She discovered that her experience, while devastating, was unfortunately common. The group included people from all walks of life, doctors, lawyers, teachers, retirees, who had been targeted by similar operations. The hardest part, Sophie told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings, wasn't losing the money or even the public embarrassment. It was realizing that I had been studied and manipulated like a laboratory specimen. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every shared dream, it was all calculated to exploit my emotions. Through therapy, Sophie learned that victims of sophisticated fraud operations shouldn't blame themselves. These criminals are professionals who spend their entire careers perfecting their manipulation techniques. They know exactly what to say and do to bypass people's natural defenses and gain their trust. 6 months after Vincent's arrest, Sophie made a decision that surprised our entire family. She decided to become an advocate for fraud victims, using her experience to help others recognize and avoid similar scams. She started speaking at financial literacy seminars, wrote articles for women's magazines about romance fraud, and even consulted with law enforcement agencies' training officers to recognize sophisticated scam operations. "If my pain can prevent even one family from going through what we experienced," she told a newspaper reporter, "then maybe some good can come from this nightmare." Sophie's advocacy work led to some unexpected developments. Other victims of Vincent's network began reaching out to her, sharing their stories and helping build stronger cases against his accomplices. She testified not only at Vincent's trial but also at the trials of 3 other members of his organization. One of the most shocking revelations came when federal investigators traced Vincent's financial records. They discovered that he had stolen over $3.2 million from victims across 8 states, but had spent most of it maintaining his elaborate lifestyle and funding the operations of his criminal network. The luxury cars, expensive clothes, and lavish wedding expenses weren't just props for his scams. They were necessary investments to maintain his credibility as a successful businessman. The fake business associates who had attended Sophie's wedding were revealed to be career criminals with extensive records. James, the man who couldn't remember his own company's office building, had been Vincent's partner for over 5 years. Margaret and William, the supposed aunt and uncle from Denver, were actually a husband and wife team who specialized in playing family members for various con artists. Most disturbing was the discovery that Vincent's entire romantic history was fabricated. The passionate love letters he'd written to Sophie, the intimate conversations about their future together, the tender moments that had convinced her she'd found her soulmate, all of it was scripted material that he'd used with previous victims. Federal agents found a laptop in Vincent's possession containing what they called relationship templates, detailed scripts for different phases of romantic relationships, complete with talking points for various situations and emotional responses designed to deepen victims' trust and attachment. David's role in exposing Vincent's operation earned him recognition from federal law enforcement agencies. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division offered him a consulting position, helping them identify and investigate similar fraud networks. While he initially declined to maintain his primary career, he agreed to provide training for agents learning to recognize financial scam operations. The most important lesson, David told a group of FBI trainees, is that these criminals succeed because they're patient and professional. They don't look like stereotypical con artists. They're often charming, well-dressed, articulate people who seem too successful to need anyone else's money. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. Our father's business actually benefited from the experience in an unexpected way. Word spread through Chicago's business community about how our family had narrowly avoided a sophisticated fraud operation. Other business owners began consulting with Dad about security measures and due diligence procedures. He eventually started a side business providing security consulting for high-net-worth individuals and families. "I learned that success makes you a target," Dad explained to a client. "The more successful you become, the more attractive you are to people who want to take what you've built. You have to be constantly vigilant without becoming paranoid." Mom struggled more than the rest of us with the emotional aftermath of Vincent's deception. She had genuinely liked him and had been looking forward to having him as a son-in-law. The realization that his affection for our family had been completely manufactured left her feeling violated and suspicious of new people in ways that concerned us. She joined her own support group for family members of fraud victims and slowly learned to trust her instincts again. The experience taught her that being too trusting isn't necessarily a character flaw, but that wise trust requires verification and time. "I raise my daughters to see the good in people," she told her support group. "I don't want to change that, but I also want them to be smart about protecting themselves." The ripple effects of Vincent's arrest continued for years. His conviction led to the dismantling of a network that included over 20 active criminals across the country. The FBI estimated that the network had stolen more than $50 million from victims over the course of a decade. Several other families reached out to us after learning about our story through media coverage. Some had been victimized by Vincent's network, while others had narrowly escaped similar scams. We formed an informal support network, sharing information about red flags and helping each other heal from the trauma of discovering that trusted relationships had been elaborate lies. One family from Phoenix told us how they'd been targeted by the same network 2 years earlier. The daughter had been courted by a man claiming to be a successful tech entrepreneur. Unlike our situation, they hadn't discovered the deception until after the wedding, when the man disappeared with $400,000 from the father's investment accounts. "Your story gives us hope," the father told us during a phone call. "It shows that these criminals can be caught, and that families can recover from this kind of betrayal." Sophie's healing journey took another positive turn when she met Daniel, a fellow fraud victim she encountered through her advocacy work. Daniel had been targeted by a different type of scam, a fake investment advisor who had stolen his inheritance, but he understood the emotional trauma of discovering that someone you trusted had been systematically deceiving you. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully. Both had learned to value transparency and verification over romantic gestures and quick emotional connections. When Daniel proposed after 2 years of dating, Sophie insisted on a comprehensive background check, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wanted to approach marriage with complete honesty and openness. "Real love isn't threatened by scrutiny," Sophie said when she announced their engagement. "If anything, it's strengthened by it." Daniel not only passed every background check, but actively participated in the verification process, providing financial records, employment history, and references without being asked. He understood that Sophie's caution wasn't personal, it was wisdom gained through painful experience. Their wedding was a small, intimate ceremony with only close family and friends in attendance. Every guest was someone Sophie and Daniel had known for years, and the celebration focused on genuine relationships rather than impressive displays of wealth or status. David and I found that our marriage had been strengthened by the experience as well. His willingness to trust his professional instincts, even when it meant potentially causing family conflict, demonstrated his integrity and commitment to protecting the people he loved. I learned to value his analytical nature as a gift rather than viewing it as excessive caution. We also implemented new security measures in our own lives. We established protocols for verifying anyone who approached us with financial opportunities, created stronger passwords for our accounts, and became more careful about sharing personal information on social media platforms. The experience taught us that sophisticated criminals often gather intelligence about their targets from publicly available sources. Vincent had learned about our family's financial success, our relationships, and even our personal interests by carefully studying our social media profiles, business websites, and public records. "Privacy isn't paranoia," David now tells people. "It's a necessary form of self-defense in an age when personal information can be weaponized against you." Vincent's trial became a landmark case in federal fraud prosecution. The evidence we provided, combined with testimony from other victims and the extensive documentation of his criminal network, resulted in one of the longest sentences ever handed down for romance-based fraud. During his sentencing hearing, Vincent showed no remorse for his crimes. He argued that his victims were wealthy people who could afford their losses, and that he had simply redistributed money from those who had too much to those who needed it more. The judge's response was scathing. "Mr. Castellano, you didn't redistribute wealth. You destroyed families, shattered trust, and caused psychological trauma that will last for years. Your victims weren't just losing money. They were losing their faith in human relationships and their ability to trust their own judgment." Vincent was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay restitution to his victims, though federal agents acknowledged that most of the stolen money would never be recovered. The sentencing brought closure for our family, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sophie's advocacy work had evolved into a full-time career change. She left her marketing job to become a victim rights advocate, working with federal agencies and nonprofit organizations to help fraud victims recover and prevent future crimes. "I found my calling in the worst experience of my life," she told a conference of law enforcement officers. "If I can help other families avoid what we went through, or help victims recover more quickly, then my pain serves a purpose." 5 years after Vincent's arrest, our family gathered for Sophie's second wedding, this time to Daniel, a man whose character and background we knew as well as our own. The ceremony was everything her first wedding had pretended to be: genuine, joyful, and surrounded by people who truly loved and supported the couple. As I watched Sophie dance with her new husband, I reflected on how much our family had grown and changed since that devastating day when we discovered Vincent's deception. We had learned hard lessons about trust, verification, and the importance of listening to our instincts. But more importantly, we had learned that genuine relationships, the ones built on truth, shared experiences, and mutual respect, become stronger when tested by adversity. The bonds between family members who support each other through crisis are different from those formed only in good times. Our story continues to serve as a warning to other families about the sophistication of modern fraud operations. But it's also a story of resilience, recovery, and the power of family bonds to survive even the most devastating betrayals. Vincent Castellano remains in federal prison, where he will stay for many years to come. His victims, including our family, have rebuilt their lives and learned to trust again, more wisely this time, but no less completely. The greatest victory isn't just that we avoided financial ruin or that a criminal was brought to justice. It's that we emerged from the experience stronger, wiser, and more committed to protecting each other and helping other families recognize and avoid similar threats. If you ever find yourself questioning whether someone in your life is genuine, remember our story. Trust your instincts, ask the hard questions, and remember that real love, unlike the counterfeit version, grows stronger under scrutiny rather than weaker. And if you or someone you know has been victimized by a romance scam or marriage fraud, remember that recovery is possible. Justice can be achieved, and the capacity for genuine love and trust can be restored with time, support, and wisdom gained through experience.